Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing. Today we are going to be continuing to read Dream Days by Kenneth Grahame. So, let's get going. Of course, I had no idea where San Salvador really was. I haven't now, for that matter. But it seemed a right-sounding sort of name for a place that was to have a bay that was to hold a French frigate that was to be cut out. So, as I said, we sailed for San Salvador and made the bay about 8 bells that evening, and saw the topmasts of the frigate over the headland that sheltered her. And forthwith there was summoned a council of war. It is a very serious matter, a council of war. We had not held one hitherto, pirates and truck of that sort not calling for such solemn treatment. But in an affair that might almost be called international, it seemed well to proceed gravely and by regular steps. So we met in my cabin. Whoa, I forgot about the idle reading. So we met in my cabin. The princess and the boatswain and a boy from the real-life lot, and a man from among the bookmen, and a fellow from no man's land, and myself in the chair. The boatswain had taken part in so many cuttings out during his past career that practically he did all the talking, and was the council of war himself. It was to be an affair of boats, he explained. A boat's crew would be told off to cut the cables, and 2 boats' crews to climb stealthily on board and overpower the sleeping Frenchmen, and 2 more boats' crews to haul the doomed vessel out of the bay. This made rather a demand on my limited resources as to crews, but I was prepared to stretch a point in a case like this, and I speedily brought my numbers up to the requisite efficiency. The night was both moonless and starless. I had arranged all that. When the boats pushed off from the side of our vessel and made their way toward the ship that, unfortunately for itself, had been singled out by fate to carry me home in triumph. I was in excellent spirits, and indeed, as I stepped over the side, a lawless idea crossed my mind of discovering another princess on board the frigate, a French one this time. I had heard that sort was rather nice, but I abandoned the notion at once, recollecting that the heroes of all history had always been noted for their unswerving constancy. The French captain was snug in bed when I clambered in through his cabin window and held a naked cutlass to his throat. Naturally, he was surprised and considerably alarmed, till I discharged one of my set speeches at him, pointing out that my men already had his crew under hatchways, that his vessel was even then being towed out of harbour, and that, on his accepting the situation with a good grace, his person and private property would be treated with all the respect due to the representative of a great nation for which I entertained feelings of the profoundest admiration and regard, and all that sort of thing. It was a beautiful speech. The Frenchman at once presented me with his parole, in the usual way, and, in a reply of some power and pathos, only begged that I would retire a moment while he put on his trousers. This I gracefully consented to do, and the incident ended. 2 of my boats were sunk by the fire from the forts on the shore, and several brave fellows were severely wounded in the hand-to-hand struggle with the French crew for the possession of the frigate. But the boatswain's admirable strategy, and my own reckless gallantry in securing the French captain at the outset, had the fortunate result of keeping down the death rate. It was all for the sake of the princess that I had arranged so comparatively tame a victory. For myself, I rather liked a fair amount of bloodletting, red-hot shot and flying splinters. But when you have girls about the place, they have got to be considered to a certain extent. There was another supper party that night in my cabin, as soon as we had got well out to sea, and the French captain, who was the guest of the evening, was in the greatest possible form. We became sworn friends, and exchanged invitations to come and stay at each other's homes, and really it was quite difficult to induce him to take his leave. But at last he and his crew were bundled into their boats, and after I had pressed some pirate bullion upon them, delicately of course, but in a pleasant manner that admitted of no denial, the gallant fellows quite broke down, and we parted, our bosoms heaving with a full sense of each other's magnanimity and good fellowship. The next day, which was nearly all taken up with shifting our quarters into the new frigate, so honourably and easily acquired, was a very pleasant one, as everyone who has gone up in the world and moved into a larger house will readily understand. At last I had grim, black guns all along each side, instead of a rotten brass carronade. At last I had a square-rigged ship, with real yards and a proper quarter-deck. In fact, now that I had soared as high as could be hoped in a single voyage, it seemed about time to go home and cut a dash and show off a bit. The worst of this ocean theatre was, it held no proper audience. It was hard, of course, to relinquish all the adventures that still lay untouched in these southern seas. Whaling, for instance, had not yet been entered upon. The joys of exploration, and strange inland cities innocent of the white man, still awaited me. And the book of wrecks and rescues was not yet even opened. But I had achieved a frigate and a princess, and that was not so bad for a beginning, and more than enough to show off with before those dull and adventurous folk who continued on their mill-horse round at home. The voyage home was a record one, so far as mere speed was concerned, and all adventures were scornfully left behind as we rattled along for other adventurers who had still their laurels to win. Hardly later than the noon of next day we dropped anchor in Plymouth Sound, and heard the intoxicating clamour of bells, the roar of artillery, and the hoarse cheers of an excited populace surging down to the quays, that told us we were being appreciated at something like our true merits. The Lord Mayor was waiting there to receive us, and with him several admirals of the fleet, as we walked down the lane of pushing, enthusiastic Devonians, the Princess and I, and our war-worn, weather-beaten, spoil-laden crew. Everybody was very nice about the French frigate, and the pirate booty, and the scars still fresh on our young limbs. Yet I think what I liked best of all was that they all pronounced the Princess to be a duck, and a peerless, brown-haired darling, and a true mate for a hero, and of the right princess breed. The air was thick with invitations, and with the smell of civic banquets in a forward stage, but I sternly waved all festivities aside. The coaches and four I had ordered immediately on arriving were blocking the whole of the high street. The champing of bits and the pawing of gravel summoned us to take our seats and be off, to where the real performance awaited us, compared with which all this was but an interlude. I placed the princess in the most highly gilded coach of the lot, and mounted to my place at her side, and the rest of the crew scrambled on board of the others as best they might. The whips cracked, and the crowd scattered and cheered as we broke into a gallop for home. The noisy bells burst into a farewell peal. Yes, that was undoubtedly the usual bell for a schoolroom tea, and high time too, I thought, as I tumbled out of the bath, which was beginning to feel very hard to the projecting proportions of my framework. As I trotted downstairs, hungrier even than usual, farewells floated up from the front door, and I heard the departing voices of our angular elderly visitors as they made their way down the walk. Man was still catching it, apparently. Man was getting it hot. And much man cared. The seas were his, and their islands. He had his frigates for the taking, his pirates and their hordes for an unregarded cutlass stroke or two. And there were princesses in plenty, waiting for him somewhere. Princesses of the right sort. And that actually neatly brings us to the end of the episode, and the reading as well, to go with it. So I will say thank you very much for joining me. I hope you all have a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon or night, no matter what time of day it is. I hope you all have a wonderful one of it. And as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.